Welcome to Budget EDH. Today we'll be looking at Mogis, God of Slaughter. So Mogis is a 4-mana 7/5 legendary enchantment creature god. It has indestructible and it has the ability as long as your devotion to black and red is less than 7, Mogis isn't a creature. So you just need 7 or more devotion. That would be the pips in the top right hand corner. And then Mogis will become a creature. It's a very powerful creature for its cost. 7/5 is nothing to scoff at, especially with indestructible. And it also has, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Mogis deals 2 damage to that player unless he or she sacrifices a creature. So the sacrifice is going to give us our group slug theme. So the budget is very aggressive. It's 25 cents per card. We can get away with this because Mogis himself is a really, really powerful commander, 7/5 indestructible, and it also is in very strong colors. So again, group slug is basically the archetype where we're trying to damage all of our opponents at the same time. Goading is kind of similar to that, but goading is usually it's kind of manipulating your opponents to attack each other. Sometimes your opponents don't even have creatures to attack with, so we don't actually have that downside. We're going to deal 2 damage to them regardless. We're also a bit of an enchantment theme. The enchantment theme is coming from the fact that we want Mogis to be a creature most of the time. It's not actually that much of a downside. And we're also going to be control and a combo-ish control because we really want to prevent our opponents from having creatures. Because we're group slug, we're not goading them. We don't care if their opponents have creatures. Ideally, the board is completely empty and we're the only person with a creature, God Mogis, and then he's the one attacking and killing everyone. And then the combo I will point out later. So in terms of mana rocks, the most important one is obviously Altar of the Pantheon. It has the ability add 1 mana of any color. If you control a god, a demigod, or a legendary enchantment, you gain 1 life. So obviously Mogis is our main way of getting a god. It is also a legendary enchantment if it somehow loses that creature type. Otherwise, there aren't that many other legendary enchantments that I can think of, and it also increases the devotion to each color and each combination of colors by 1. So this only counts for 1 devotion for Mogis, regardless of how many, even though it counts for each color. Charcoal Diamond and Fire Diamond are just budget mana rock. Glittering Stockpile is a mana rock that actually has a mana cost in it. Otherwise, you should probably not sacrifice it unless you have an amazing turn. Guardian Idol and the Hedron Archive are just generic mana rocks. Pristine Talisman is here because, again, we're going to be group slugging our opponents. So we're going to actually be in sort of a race to kill our opponents faster than we kill ourselves, because everyone's probably going to be gunning for us because we're actually gunning for them. And we don't actually have that many ways of gaining lifelink or vigilance. So you just got to have to roll with the punches. So Pristine Talisman is going to help with that. Rakdos, Locking, and Sisay's Rings are, again, more mana rocks. And Vanefire Border Post is an unusual mana rock, but it's going to give us 2 devotion. Don't worry about the second pay 1, return a basic land you control to its owner's hand. That's probably not worth activating ever. I would recommend just paying 3 mana to put it onto the battlefield tapped. Vessel of Endless Rest, again, another budget mana rock that we play in most budget decks. And Fires of Invention. This is actually one of our most important combo pieces because we have another card called Pestilence that's going to actually have a very intense mana cost to activate. But with Fires of Invention, we can circumvent actually paying mana for any of our spells and dump all of our mana into activated abilities. Otherwise, Fires of Invention is probably one of the best mana ramp spells in the game, especially for decks that don't have instant speed counterspell or instant speed interaction that they have to worry about. Just play 2 spells and then dump all your mana into activated abilities. Speaking of activated abilities, Foreboding Fruit, another kind of divination, but it also gives us life. So the life, again, is probably going to be much more relevant than you might think, especially since we're going to be group slugging our opponents, and a lot of our burn spells actually do hurt ourselves. But then with it is a small combo with Fires of Invention because we're going to have mana just lying around, and so just eat the food token. There's not really a combo with the food token otherwise. Next, we have Ignite the Future, Inspired Tinkering. Again, with the Fires of Invention combo, Ignite the Future. Both of these are really just draw 3, but Ignite the Future is an insane mana cost of 8, but it's a lot more reasonable when you don't actually, you can't actually cast more than 2 spells per turn. Otherwise, these are just reasonable mana cards that draw you cards. Speaking of cards that draw you cards, Sign in Blood to draw more cards, and Siphon Mind, another way to draw cards. Share the Spoils is kind of a sneaky way that a budget deck can get above its power level. So normally all of our cards are generally doing very specific things and also just being very, very low budget, we're not going to be showing off any valuable cards, but our opponents might be showing something powerful like Dockside Extortionist or cards that counterspell Dockside Extortionist. Share the spoils. Keep in mind it only allows you to play the spoiled cards during your turn. So exiling a counterspell is actually pretty irrelevant. And Experimental Frenzy is another amazing card draw spell. It also has the activate ability for mana to destroy it whenever you happen to have 7 cards in hand that you really, really want to cast. Otherwise, you're probably better off just casting random spells. Next, we have some more budget card draw. Underworld Connections is a 3 mana Phyrexian Arena that's actually going to cost 1 life and 1 mana each time. Theater of Horrors is a much better version of Phyrexian Arena, especially in our deck. It's providing 2 devotion, and then just like Phyrexian Arena actually. And then it also has the ability you can play lands and cast spells from among cards exiled with Theaters of Horrors as long as the opponent lost life this turn. So you could probably cast spells during your opponent's turn because of Mogis. Otherwise, you're just going to have to either attack them, do damage to them somehow, or activate Theater of Horrors' last ability. Next, we have some more card draw creatures. Caves of Chaos Adventurer is just an initiative and aggressive creature. Tectonic Giant is basically the same thing, except it has a less aggressive stat line, and it can do 3 damage to each opponent, which is actually relevant. Arterial Flow, again, another way of draining our opponent's cards from hand. Pretty efficient at that. We don't really have any vampires, so don't worry about that text. Breath of Daragaz is just an efficient way of doing 4 damage to each creature. Mogis is indestructible, but if he wasn't, he actually has 5 toughness, so he's probably never going to die. Next, we have some more board wipes with chain reactions. Is basically the red mana, red Wrath of God. Basically play in any sort of control deck. Consuming Vapors is a efficient removal spell. It's going to target 1 player, and then that player will have to sacrifice that creature, and you'll gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Dance Macabre is another way of nuking our opponent's creatures. Each player has to sacrifice a non-token creature. So ideally, you actually sacrifice nothing because you have Mogis as a non-creature, and then you will reanimate one of your opponent's creatures this way, and then if you get really high with rolling a d20, you're going to return 2 creatures. Next, we have Hex. This is basically the 6 mana one-sided board wipe. All things serious though, 6 mana destroy 6 creatures is pretty darn efficient. And if we somehow don't have 6 targets, we can target Mogis if Mogis is a creature, and he's probably not going to be destroyed. Next, we have Mizian Mortis, a literal one-sided board wipe for 6 mana. A little less efficient than Breath of Daragaz, but being one-sided is very efficient, or very, very powerful, especially in budget decks. Necromantic Selection, another way of nuking our opponent's board. Again, Mogis always lives through all these board wipes, so that's why we're picking these up. Speaking of living through a board wipe, Nightmare Unmaking is basically the only board wipe that Mogis will not live through, so try to make sure Mogis is not a creature, or make sure that Mogis is on the right side of the power number. So Nightmare Unmaking says exile each creature with power greater than the number of cards in your hand, or exile each creature with power less than the number of cards in your hand. So ideally you have 6 cards in hand, so you exile each creature with 5 or less power. Void is another destroy spell, but it only destroys creatures with the mana value equal to the number you choose, and then you're going to choose a target player, probably an opponent, and they're going to discard all non-land cards with the same mana value. So mostly you don't care about a discard, just destroy everything that matters on the battlefield, and you're probably going to choose 0 because most of the time if you have to destroy a lot of stuff, it's usually because they have a lot of tokens. Volcanic Vision is another board wipe. Again, we have so many board wipes. Yaheni's Expertise is another board wipe. All of these board wipes, Mogis is going to live through. Yaheni's Expertise in particular is going to let us double spell. It's going to let us cast a CMC 3 or less from our hand without paying a mana cost, which is always amazing. Speaking of more board wipes, Invoke Calamity is an instant speed, one of our few instant speed spells. I know the mana cost is like insanely red, but you can cast up to 2 instants and or sorcery spells with total mana value 6 or less from our graveyard without paying the mana cost. If those spells will be put into your graveyard, exile them instead. So I'm not sure what you're casting for 5 mana, but you're probably just casting a 6 mana board wipe, and then if you get a little extra something, that's pretty good too. Price of Fame is always a must-have for any black deck. It basically says 2 mana destroy target commander, and then it's going to surveil too as well. Knight of Souls Betrayal, again, Mogis lives through this all. Mogis is always alive. All creatures get -1/-1. A pretty excellent card in a budget deck. Parasitic Impetus is a 3-mana goad spell. I know I said we're not actually a goad deck, but we're gonna be running both of these to try to keep creatures off our back, and then if they die, no biggie. Basically, treat these as removal spells rather than removing your opponent's. And finally, we get to our combo. One of our combo pieces, Pestilence. This combos with Fires of Invention. It's a 4-mana enchantment and it has the ability at the end of turn, if there are no creatures in play, sacrifice Pestilence. And then that sounds like a bad idea, right? Well, ideally, Mogis is in play, and you need Mogis to be a creature with Pestilence so that Pestilence will never blow itself up. And then it has the ability pay 1 black. Pestilence deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. So as long as you have more black mana, then your opponents have toughness, then they basically can never keep their creatures. You're going to constantly nuke them. And with Mogis dealing 2 damage to each opponent per turn, they're going to be dying real soon. And then the final combo piece is Chandra's Incinerator. If you combo Chandra's Incinerator with Pestilence, Chandra's Incinerator is going to deal damage equal to target creature that player controls whenever you do non-combat damage to an opponent. So Mogis, I believe, is life loss. Let me double check here. To deal 2 damage. Actually, it is damage, so that's another combo there. Yeah, Chandra's Incinerator is definitely one of the best cards in our deck. I know 6 mana is a lot, and there's honestly not that many ways to get around that. You just gotta pray and play it for 6 mana. So your opponents will then have a choice of taking 2 damage to their face and then 2 damage to a creature they control, or they're just probably gonna just sacrifice a creature if they can. Chandra's Incinerator is also a 6-mana 6/6, and it has the ability whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals damage to target creature or planeswalker that players control. The Crone War is another kind of pseudo board wipe. I know in Limited this was basically a completely one-sided board wipe. It has 3 abilities. It's an enchantment and it has Saga. Gain control of target creature for as long as the Crone War remains on the battlefield. Until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able, and then each tapped creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. So basically, when it enters, you steal your opponent's best creature or most important creature. Next turn, your opponents have to attack. Either they attack your other opponents, which is ideal, or they attack you and then you can somehow block them or chump with the creature you just stole. And then finally, each creature will basically nuke itself. Unless they have more toughness than power, they're going to die. Hidetsugu is just a 4-mana 4/4 ogre that's actually just gonna sacrifice a creature. That's not really relevant unless you want Mogis to stop being a creature. It can sacrifice itself though, and then it also has the ability 3 tap to basically impulse draw and then deal damage equal to that mana value to any target. You can only play it that turn though, so you should probably do it on your turn, and then see if you can play the land that's inevitably going to be on top. Next, we have Karavak the Merciless. This is just a 7-mana 5/4 that's going to completely take over the game, assuming your opponents don't counterspell it immediately. Ravenous Chupacabra, a 4-mana creature that just destroys stuff, mostly here for devotion purposes. And then Shriekmaw, another 5-mana 3/2 that destroys creatures. They have to be non-artifact, non-black, but otherwise, don't worry about the evoke or like trying to sacrifice it for value. There aren't that many ways to sacrifice in this deck anyways. Next, we have Ghoul's Night Out, a great way of reanimating, specifically Fanatic of Mogis. Fanatic of Mogis being another combo piece, great with Chandra's Incinerator. Fanatic of Mogis has the ability, when it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each opponent equal to your devotion to red. So Ghoul's Night Out and Unbreakable Bond are actually here just to reanimate Fanatic of Mogis. Unbreakable Bond being a little bit surprising because when you reanimate Fanatic of Mogis, it's going to get a lifelink counter when it enters the battlefield. It's not a triggered ability, sorry. It's just gonna enter with a lifelink counter on it. And then Fanatic of Mogis is gonna gain you a ton of life. It's basically build your own Gary. Speaking of Gary, if you actually have the budget for it, you should probably play it. Diabolic Servitude, another way of reanimating Fanatic of Mogis, and then Agitator Ant, another way of goading our opponent's creatures. At the beginning of your end step, each player may put 2 counters on the creature they control, goad each creature that had counters put on it this way. Ideally, you actually just agitate your own ant constantly because, if your opponents are agitating themselves, then their creatures are inevitably going to be bigger than your creatures. Next, we have Furball Flutus, a very powerful way of actually stealing your opponent's creatures. There aren't that many sack outlets. Again, there's only Hidetsugu, so don't worry about sacrificing the creature you steal. Just steal away, basically. Gonti, Lord of Luxury, a 4-mana kind of defensive creature, but it basically says draw a card from your opponent. Hamlet Back Goliath is just a 7-mana 6/6. It's just big. Kind of a filler card, but hey, it's here. Kardar Doomscourge is a little bit of another cheeky goad card. It doesn't literally say goad, but until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able, and attack a player other than you if able. They can actually... So it basically is goad, except it doesn't goad... creatures. It does goad creatures that are not on the battlefield yet, and it also has the ability whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 and you gain 1. So that will apply to any creature attacking, not just yours but also your opponent's, and that's kind of the sneaky combo. Next, we have some more just general good stuff. Nightshade Harvester is a 4-mana elf, 2/2, I think, and then it has the ability whenever a land enters the battlefield under opponent's control, that player loses 1 life and you put a counter on Nightshade Harvester. Tiamat's Fanatics is a 5-mana 4/3 haste myriad, so again, a group slug theme. Pontiff of Blight is an excellent way of draining your opponent's draining your opponent's life total, and it's gonna definitely help out with the racing aspect that this deck has. And then Wildfire Devils, I just like this, and we have a ton of board wipes, so every instant of sorcery is basically a board wipe. So ideally, you just hit yourself, and then you randomly cast one of your own spells. If it hits one of your opponents, chances are they're not going to actually have any spells anyways. But otherwise, 1 in 4 chance to actually wipe the board. Pretty nice. All right, next we have Bloodthirsty Blade, a literal gold equipment, and then Boots of Speed, probably one of the best replacements for Lightning Greaves. If you don't have Lightning Greaves, the 1 mana cost is actually pretty relevant just to make Mogis a creature as well. Next, we're finally getting to the lands. We play both the game lands because, again, Mogis is kind of a racing commander. Path of Ancestry is probably not going to trigger since we don't really have any gods besides Mogis himself. Otherwise, it's just a tap dual land. Next, we have Rakdos Carnarium so that we draw a little bit of cards. Spinerock Knoll is pretty excellent because we're probably going to be doing tons of damage. Mogis himself actually is a 7/5, so assuming you connect with Mogis, he's going to trigger the spot or enable you to cast the card exiled this way without paying its mana cost. Very rarely you can dump a bunch of mana into Pestilence and then activate Spinerock Knoll on someone else's turn. Next, we have the standard lands. There's nothing special here. These are just the standard lands I include in every deck. So Mogis is extremely powerful. I hope you guys have fun with it. See you later.